Kyle Busch calls out Ross Chastain after the NASCAR Cup Series race. Ford will evaluate Hailie Deegan to see if she can move out the Xfinity Series or not in 2024. And Daniel Suarez could be facing some pretty severe penalties after what he did on pit road after the NASCAR Cup Series race at COTA. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start talking about Coolray. As it was reported by Adam Stern on Friday morning, that Coolray has been flooded with positive reviews, 1,000 new followers, and much more, says marketing representative for Coolray, Adam Johnson. One of the big reasons why is because Coolray is a big sponsor of Josh Williams, and we've seen a lot of sponsors in the companies that Josh Williams associate with get a lot of support and a lot of help. It's really exciting stuff, and happy to see the Coolray is getting a lot of support from a lot of people. Really happy to see that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kyle Busch. As someone put out a photo yesterday showing the potential 2023 Cheddar's patriotic scheme. We're likely going to see that, of course, at the COTA 600 in a couple of months from now. To be honest, I think this is a really awesome looking Cheddar's car. I think the current Cheddar's car they've got is really good. But this patriotic scheme looks absolutely incredible. I hope we see it a couple times this year. And this is really awesome. Look at paint scheme, one of my favorite paint schemes we've seen so far this season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about McLaren. As it was reported by Adam Stern on Friday afternoon, that McLaren will be part of the new LEGO 2K Drive video game, partnering with LEGO and 2K to get a Solus GT and F1 LM vehicles included. This is really awesome to see. McLaren, of course, a big brand in Formula 1. Formula 1 continues to grow in the United States, and to see them partnering up with LEGO is massive, especially for younger children that will see Formula 1 and they'll see Formula 1 and maybe they'll want to watch Formula 1. So overall, really exciting stuff. Great to see for sure, and I absolutely love the fact that we're seeing that happen where McLaren will be part of the new LEGO game. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain. Before the weekend even got started on Friday, Ross Chastain went up to the 251-foot observation tower at Circuit of the Americas, and he dropped the watermelon off the Circuit of the America tower. There were targets for him to hit. He probably dropped multiple watermelons off, and I think that's really cool to see that he did that. Ross Chastain is absolutely a wild man. He's done a lot of crazy things, and I think it's pretty cool to see. He dropped the watermelon off the Circuit of the America towers. Pretty exciting stuff, and I thought that was really cool that he did that, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Circuit of the Americas. That was reported by Joseph Wrigley after the NASCAR Cup Series race that the Cup race was 3 hours, 30 minutes, and 32 seconds long. That is the longest road course race in NASCAR Cup Series history since Riverside in 1976. Obviously, with how many overtime finishes we had near the end of the race, which we're going to talk about the etiquette. Basically, that's one of the reasons why it took so long, because this race would have probably been about a 3-hour race had there been etiquette basically not been as crazy as it was near the end, but still a long race nonetheless for the fans at the racetrack, and honestly, a 3.5-hour long race, which is one of the longer road course races, because road course races generally are a lot shorter. But overall, not surprised by some of the length. It's due to the etiquette near the end of the race. And overall, it was definitely a little frustrating to watch some of the etiquette going on at the end of the race, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Atlantic City. As it was reported by Adam Stern on Friday morning, the Atlantic City, the F1 is not involved with the Atlantic City, New Jersey real estate development that was reported this week to be building an F1 racetrack. There's been a lot of rumors and rumors about a new Atlantic City racetrack, and F1 had been rumored at the time that they were going to go there. But it was confirmed by multiple reporters and sources that it will not be the case and it will not be happening. There's also rumors maybe that NASCAR could be involved. I'm not entirely sure on that, but it is really interesting. There's a new track they're building up in the Atlantic City area in New Jersey. Of course, Formula 1 has been talking about wanting to expand and do more races in the United States. Talking about maybe going to New York. Talking about going to maybe different areas. Atlantic City's not too far, I think, from New York City. So overall, wouldn't be surprised if it happened. But again, as of right now, it's not in the cards and not in the plans. That doesn't surprise or shock me, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Scott Borchetta. As Scott Borchetta this past weekend was racing in a Trans Am race, I believe at Road Atlanta, and he was involved in a pretty scary accident in the Trans Am race and was transported to a hospital after the crash. Scott Borchetta is okay, which is really, really good to see. First of all, I want to wish Scott Borchetta a very good recovery. Second thing, the comments under thread, the Taylor Swift stands, I know what happened with Scott Borchetta, and I understand you being upset, but at the same token, same time, that's unacceptable with the comments below, and I wish him for a speedy recovery because that's all you can ask for. The fact that people are wishing him to get hurt is wrong, it's awful, and I feel terrible for Scott Borchetta in this situation, and I'm wishing him a speedy recovery so he can get back to the racetrack or even get back to the track in general, and I wish him a very, very well and speedy recovery. It's a shame that people feel like it, that they got to feel that way, but I'm not surprised that people feel that way because people are just not nice people overall in general. It's just frustrating to see that people have to act like that, though, in the comments especially. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Zane Smith. Now, Zane Smith, of course, won the NASCAR Truck Series race this past weekend in Circuit Americas, but after the Truck Series race, his truck actually ended up catching fire. After he had done burnouts on the front stretch, basically with his pit crew out there, he basically had his truck end up catching fire. Now, a theory going around is that basically the mud flaps are the big reason why they end up catching on fire. I don't think you saw that in the Xfinity Series nor the trucks in the Cup Series race, but it's interesting that in the Truck Series race, this ended up happening. I don't know what they can do to fix a solution where these trucks don't catch fire, especially during burnouts, because if cars are spinning out a lot, especially, you may see these mud flaps catch fire, and it could cause a driver's race to end early. That's something I think that they're going to have to address, an issue that they're going to have to fix overall, and hopefully they can fix this issue going forward. But yeah, the truck literally caught on fire. I hope they make a die cast out of that, and hopefully they can make a die cast, because I think that'd be really, really cool overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, after the Truck Series race where Kyle Busch ended up finishing second, he actually ended up having blisters after the truck race at Circuit of the Americas, as he showed on his hand. Bass said that basically his hands are too girly now for the old school shifters with the H-pattern shifters, because remember, the next-gen cars have a different set of shifters than what the trucks in Xfinity Series cars have, where they have the normal H-pattern shifters, which have changed. That's why Kyle Busch got blisters on his hand, and basically he has to get his hands, I guess, a little trained for these type of shifters, especially if he's going to run other road course races, which I think he might be running some other road course races and Xfinity trucks this year. I could be wrong on that, though. But still, he's not as used to that because he's been used to the Cup cars now and the shifters in that situation. He's not used to doing the truck shifters in road courses or the Xfinity Series shifters on road courses now because he's been used to that. So in my honest opinion, though, I hope his hands can recover so he can be ready for Richmond. He did have a great run yesterday. We'll talk about Kyle Busch a lot in this video. But overall, I'm glad to see that hopefully Kyle Busch can recover a little bit from that. It's interesting, though, that he did have some blisters on his hand after the race. Kind of hopeful that things can get resolved and he get his hands back in shape. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the IndyCar game. As in the investor call that Motorsports Game had, they confirmed on Friday that the IndyCar game has been delayed to 2024. Obviously, you've been following the story for a very, very long time. You know that Motorsports Games is a company that is not to be trusted. There's been issues with the NASCAR game. NASCAR 21 Edition was absolutely horrendous. There's been a lot of stuff that's come out from this company. A lot of other YouTubers and a lot of people have covered this a lot better than I have. But this company is absolutely horrendous and one of the worst video game companies I've ever seen. And I'm not surprised that this game is not happening. I had a bad feeling this game was going to get delayed to 2024. And honestly, I am very, very worried about there even being a video game at all for IndyCar. Because the fact there's no new NASCAR game, it's been delayed for a year now. It's supposed to be a game last year. Didn't end up happening. There's supposed to be maybe a new game in 2023. That's not happening at this point. It's just a really frustrating situation, and it's disappointing to see what's going on. I hate what's happening. I hate this company. NASCAR and IndyCar need to get out of these contracts. And you look at Formula One of the big reasons why it's growing. Look at the games they're producing. I'm not saying EA is doing a great job in them, but the EA games are way better than what Motorsports Games has produced. Get out of the contracts immediately and end your contracts with these companies because they're terrible, they're bad, and they're absolutely horrendous, and they need to immediately get out of these contracts. Hopefully they get out of these contracts here sooner rather than later. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jeb Burton and Brandon Jones. As we're going to talk about the crash on the last lap at Circuit of the Americas. Now, I think Braggs obviously commented on the crash on the last lap, but the cameras did not pick him up. So they're coming down the front stretch. Jeb Burton and Brandon Jones were battling, I believe, for 11th or 12th position. And Brandon Jones was basically on the outside, came back across at Brandon Jones' nose and spun himself out into the inside wall and drove across the wall. That, in my opinion, is absolutely not on Brandon Jones. Jeb Burton literally came across his nose. What is he supposed to do? Just turn to the left? I guess he could do that, but at the same token, at the same time, Brandon Jones is going to hold his ground and hold his position. So I think, in my opinion, in that situation, I'm going to give the blame to Jeb Burton because Jeb Burton came across his nose and ran him off the racetrack. So overall, in my honest opinion, I think that's on Jeb Burton. It's a shame because Burton was having a great run. I think Burton ended up finishing like 20th in the race, but still, it's unfortunately on Jeb Burton because he was the one who ran over and ran off the racetrack. In my honest opinion, that is on him. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Tyler Reddick. Now, Tyler Reddick, of course, yesterday won his first race with 23-11 Racing in 2023, and probably the first amenity to come for Tyler Reddick. After the NASCAR Cup Series race, Denny Hamlin went over to congratulate Tyler Reddick on getting his first win with 23-11 Racing and said, "This is why I hired Tyler Reddick." Tyler Reddick, in my opinion, is a driver I expect to be really, really fast in his team. It took a couple races for Reddick to really start getting into his own. But over the last couple weeks, we've seen Tyler Reddick really showing his stuff. Tyler Reddick ended up finishing, I believe, in the top 3 at Phoenix, finished 5th at Atlanta, and now has a victory and is locked in the playoffs, pending, of course, if he gets any sort of inspections where he loses 100 points. But Tyler Reddick has really turned the season around, especially over the last 3 to 4 weeks. And I think Reddick, it took a couple weeks to just get acclimated with the car, but he's really gotten acclimated with the car, and his performance has gotten way better, and he's gotten faster on the racetrack. Overall, I'm really excited to see what Tyler Reddick can do long-term with the teams. I think Tyler Reddick is going to have a lot of success with 23-11 Racing, especially over the next couple of years. And I think Reddick is going to do a lot of great things with this organization overall. So I'm very happy for Tyler Reddick. Congratulations to him. And overall, I think it's really awesome to see Reddick getting the win and seeing all these people come and congratulate him. We'll talk about Kurt Busch in a little bit here in this episode. But overall, really excited to see what Tyler Reddick did on the track. And I think it's very phenomenal to see that he got the win for them this past weekend at COTA. And overall, seeing Denny congratulate him is really awesome to see. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kimi Raikkonen. Now, Kimi Raikkonen had an interview, and I think Autosport was the one who put this article out, but Kimi Raikkonen basically said that he enjoyed the old school style of NASCAR where you can actually pass in battle without DRS, and basically he's calling out Formula 1. That is an interesting little thing that Kimi Raikkonen did. He basically called out before the DRS came to play in Formula 1. Obviously, Formula 1 is an aero kind of game, and you have to have a lot of aerodynamics to really play a role to pass now, and DRS really is the only way you can run somebody down, and if you lose a second, you don't get the DRS, and the driver in front really pulls away. Back when Kimi Raikkonen started racing Formula 1, this wasn't really the case, and you could battle really hard, and aero wasn't as dependent. It was dependent, but it wasn't as dependent as it has become nowadays. And I think that's why NASCAR racing itself, I think a lot of drivers who come over, they enjoy it a lot better, and it's a lot more fun for them overall. So in my honest opinion, it's really great to see that Kimi Raikkonen is genuinely enjoying it. I think it's great that he loves it. Again, we'll talk about his comments later because we got more about Kimi Raikkonen we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But overall, really exciting stuff to see that Kimi Raikkonen really seems like he's enjoying NASCAR a lot more than Formula 1, especially over the last few years. And in my honest opinion, it's really good to see him enjoying Formula 1 racing because it's really good for the sport in general. If he goes out and enjoys Formula 1, and overall, I'm really happy to see that he is overall enjoying NASCAR and enjoying it over Formula 1, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Alex Bowman. Before the NASCAR Cup Series race kicked off on Saturday, Alex Bowman was interviewed and asked about what happened in Atlanta and why he was really upset with Ross Chastain after the race. Well, it's kind of was eventually gotten mentioned over the weekend, but Alex Bowman, the reason he was mad at Ross Chastain is because they were supposed to work together, and Ross Chastain decided to do his own thing like he normally does, and Bowman was very upset with Ross Chastain after the race because they didn't work together, because they had planned to work together and make a move, and Alex Bowman basically did that move, and Chastain decided not to go with him. That's why Bowman was really upset with Ross Chastain. And Ross Chastain has pissed off a lot of people this year, and that's another driver that Chastain has on his list. Chastain a lot of times out for himself. I like Ross Chastain, but sometimes Ross Chastain is out for himself, and it is really, really frustrating to see sometimes. Because I think Alex Bowman, it ended his top 10 streak because now he's got to restart his top 10 streak, and now he's got to restart that. But overall, I understand Alex Bowman's frustration, and he was supposed to work together for Ross Chastain, and they did end up working together. And that's why we saw Bowman very pissed off and frustrated with Ross Chastain after the race. I'm not surprised and not shocked to see that because we've seen Ross Chastain do things that he wants to do. And overall, it does sometimes cause frustration for NASCAR drivers. And we don't want, and drivers get frustrated with that overall. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Jenson Button. Now, Jenson Button, of course, made his NASCAR Cup Series debut this past weekend in Circuit Americas and got a very respectable 18th place finish. And basically, Jenson Button had a couple of very interesting comments today to say. First thing, he basically talked about the fact he nearly quit the race early because the cool suit on his car was not working and nearly quit the race because of the extreme heat and extreme exhaustion in his car, which I find very, very interesting that he nearly quit the race. Second thing, he got interviewed by Bob Pockrass and a bunch of other reporters, and he basically called out the racing on the racetrack, and he said that it's definitely, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed a lot of it, but basically said he enjoyed the revenge side of things, but he thought that the etiquette on track was absolutely a problem. And I agree with Jenson Button 100% because these guys were running over each other throughout the race. It was very frustrating to watch. Jenson Button got eaten up, and drivers were not racing with a lot of respect on the racetrack. And Button had quite a bit of contact. And I think Jordan Taylor was the other one, and Connor Daly were other ones who talked about the lack of respect on track as well. But I think Jenson Button will be back, of course, for a couple more weeks. And to finish 18th, though, in his NASCAR Cup Series debut, in my honest opinion, is pretty good to see for a guy that doesn't have a lot of NASCAR Cup Series experience or road course racing experience in NASCAR in general, or even stock car racing experience. This is going to help Jenson Button a lot get prepared for the future, though, and he's, of course, going to run a couple more NASCAR Cup Series races later this year. He's going to run the Chicago Street Course in early July, late June, and also is going to run at the Indianapolis Road Course in July to August. So in my honest opinion, I'm really excited to see Jeff Burton back at the racetrack. He called out the racing a little bit and the etiquette, but I think he overall had a lot of fun being out in the car, and I think that he should have had a lot of fun out in that race car. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kimi Raikkonen. Now, Kimi Raikkonen was interviewed after the NASCAR Cup Series race. Kimi Raikkonen, of course, finishing 29th at Circuit Americas. Actually, the reason he finished 29th is because he got a 30-second time penalty for cutting the corner. And Kimi Raikkonen said after the NASCAR Cup Series race, he is still unsure at this particular moment if he's going to race at all after this weekend at Circuit of the Americas. Now, Justin Marks has indicated that Kimi could make some more starts in the NASCAR Cup Series this year in 2023 if Kimi wants to. But if Kimi doesn't want to, this could be the last time Kimi Raikkonen races this year and the only time he races this year. I do hope, in all seriousness and all honesty, though, that we do get to continue to see Kimi Raikkonen back behind the wheel because I love seeing Kimi behind the wheel. He's been fun to listen to over the weekend, calling out Formula One for the etiquette of racing, for the racing on the racetrack. I hope Kimi Raikkonen does make a return to NASCAR a little bit more frequently because it's fun to see him out on the racetrack. I wanted him to come back to the racetrack, and overall, I do hope we get to see him make some more starts later this year. I know he's unsure at the moment. I think a lot of it's due to the racing on track, but I really hope we get to continue to see Kimi Raikkonen out on the racetrack because it's fun to see him out on the track, and I hope he gets to continue racing in NASCAR in the future. And honestly, I love seeing Kimi Raikkonen. It's been fun to see him out on the track, and hopefully he gets back to the racetrack once again in 2023 for a few more races this season. I want to see him continue to be back out on the track. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kyle Weatherman. As it was announced yesterday that Kyle Weatherman is going to drive the 96 for FRS Racing this upcoming weekend at Richmond Racing. Of course, this upcoming weekend, FRS Racing will be making their NASCAR Xfinity Series debut or attempting to qualify for the Xfinity Series race. And they have a great driver coming in to do the race this weekend. Kyle Weatherman, in my honest opinion, is one of the most underrated drivers in the NASCAR garage. He always runs up front, contends a lot more, has contended for top 15s and top 20s with the Our Motorsports organization. He's been really fast overall and has made that Our Motorsports organization a lot better that team should overall be. And I think that Kyle Weatherman is going to have a lot of success with FRS Racing. Of course, this team does have to qualify their way in. But I think with him coming on board, I think he'll do a great job. And maybe, just maybe, we'll see Kyle Weatherman make a lot more starts. We know that Max McLaughlin's going to run with the 96 team sometime, I think, at Watkins Glen to make his Xfinity Series debut, but this is a great opportunity nonetheless for Kyle Weatherman, and I think he will make the most of this opportunity when he gets behind the wheel. I'm excited to see him get behind the wheel at FRS Racing. I think it's going to be really fun to have him behind the wheel. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about A.J. Allmendinger versus Sheldon Creed. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, you saw the situation between Allmendinger and Sheldon Creed as they both were battling for the race lead. With about 15 laps to go in this race, you saw A.J. Allmendinger get into the back of Sheldon Creed, battling for the lead, and there was contact where Sheldon Creed ended up spinning out and lost a ton of positions. Allmendinger would go on and win the NASCAR Xfinity Series race. Now, Sheldon Creed, I think, was a little bit frustrated on pit road, but he didn't seem too upset and too mad on pit road, but he's definitely a little bit frustrated. Allmendinger said in the post-race media center, he says that Sheldon has every right to be upset and be mad that he got taken out by AJ. Look, AJ has every right to make the move. I'll say this about the move. You're going for the lead. You're going for the win. Yes, AJ got into him, but I think that was just a racing deal in my honest opinion. Granted, I think AJ could have backed off a little bit. He did get into him there. There's still plenty of time to make the move. And I think inevitably, I think that he was ultimately going to pass Sheldon. I think that Sheldon's car was not as good as AJ's, but still, he made the move a little bit too early, in my opinion, and I think that's why Sheldon has every right to be a little bit frustrated and upset. So I think that AJ went a little bit too early and a little bit too soon. They're battling hard for the lead, don't get me wrong. It was great racing in the Xfinity Series race, and then a lot of people got pissed off at AJ for it, but it's just hard racing. It sucks that it happened, and I think AJ 100% was definitely a fault for the incident. No doubt about that. But in my honest opinion, I think that it was just a racing situation, and overall, I'm not surprised to see the situation. AJ could be a little bit aggressive over at times, but AJ still nonetheless got the victory, and he will end up winning the race, which isn't a shock or surprise. But overall, seeing that situation happen, it is what it is, and I hope that AJ, can cool down just a little bit in the future. But overall, not surprised to see him basically race a little bit aggressively, because I love aggression, but sometimes it can be a little over-aggressive for others. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jimmie Johnson. As Jimmie Johnson revealed to the media this past weekend that he will not compete in this year's All-Star race. He does indicate that he could run the 2024 All-Star race, but right now the plan is for him not to race at North Wilkesboro All-Star race. And he explained the reason being is because it's too close to the All-Star race at this point, and he is not prepared for the All-Star race for 2023. He'll be there as an owner of the team, but he will not be racing in the All-Star race. It's a really big disappointment that Jimmy's not going to run the All-Star race because I think Jimmie Johnson could have been somewhat competitive. I know Jimmie has not really had a lot of opportunities and a great shot to show what he's still capable of in NASCAR because he got crashed in at Daytona. Granted, he was up front in that race most of the day, and unfortunately, he got crashed on the first lap at COTA. I know he's in the back there and qualified horrendously, but he didn't even get a really good opportunity and a really good chance to showcase if he still had it at road courses. And I really hope we'd see Jimmie Johnson run a lot more races this year. He's not had great luck. We know he's going to run the Chicago Street Course, and we know he's going to run the COTA 600 in a couple weeks down the road. About 2 months from now, he'll be running the COTA 600. But overall, I hope Jimmie gets to run a lot more races this year. It's a shame he will not run the North Wilkesboro race. I hope that they do run that car. They'll get someone else in that car. Maybe like somehow they get Kyle Weatherman an opportunity to drive a Cup car with Legacy Motor Club. I know that car is mainly for Jimmie. But overall, I think it'd be cool to have him come into play and race for the team. I think Jimmie is good. It's not good to see that Jimmie isn't running the All-Star race, but overall, in my honest opinion, I hope Jimmie does get to run a race in the future, and we'll see what happens going forward with Jimmie Johnson, and we'll see what other races he decides to run. Jimmie's probably going to announce what other races he's going to run in the foreseeable future, because Jimmie's indicated that he wants to run quite a few races in Cup this year, around 10 races. He's already ran 2, and they haven't gone according to plan so far. He's still got 2 tries as of now to show if he's still got something capable of great finishes, but we'll see what happens going forward with Jimmie, but it sucks he will not be running the All-Star race. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the appeals. As basically it was announced this past week, and we already talked about the Hendrick Motorsports appeal, where all 4 will have their appeal this upcoming Wednesday at 10 a.m. East. I believe it's 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, where the will be penalties appeals for Kyle Larson. Of course, I think Josh Berry or Chase Elliott, whoever it is, William Byron and Alex Bowman will have all their appeals basically heard for their 100-point penalties. Well, it was announced that Denny Hamlin's appeal is going to be April 6th, and Kaulig's appeal will be a week after on April 5th as well. So the Hendrick appeal is going to go first, and then the other 2 appeals are going to end up happening for Denny Hamlin and Kaulig Racing. Kaulig, of course, had the same penalty as for the 31 car, but they only have one of their lubers confiscated, and it sounds like it could be a parts issue. Denny Hamlin's appealing for what happened at Phoenix with the contact with Ross Chastain. And I think that he just feels like it was hard racing. And I think that Denny Hamlin felt a little frustrated that he got penalized for basically opening his mouth and got a 25-point penalty. I'll talk about the potential of the penalties get rescinded. Industry insiders have said that there's potentially penalties could get rescinded for Hendrick Motorsports, so that's potentially possible. Kaulig, with them only have one luber, they could get their penalty rescinded and get back into the positive points because Justin Haley still has negative points at the moment, and Denny Hamlin could get 25 points back, which would help him a lot more and be closer to the regular season championship lead at the moment. But those penalties are coming up, and they will basically be appealed here later in the next couple of weeks. Hendrick penalty will continue. I wonder if Hendrick will, just in case, have their other crew chiefs staying by. I think they'll have the normal crew chiefs back, but if they don't come back, they still got 2 weeks worth of suspensions left because the Hendrick groups have basically had their crew chiefs out for the last 2 weeks, but the penalty appeals will be heard later this week and in the next couple of weeks as well. We will overhear those appeals coming up. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Larry McReynolds. As it was announced in Stage 3 about 20 laps ago at Circuit of the Americas that Larry McReynolds is going to join the Fox Sports booth at Richmond Raceway. Now, obviously, Larry McReynolds has been in the Fox Sports booth many, many times in his career. He was a main guy in the Fox Sports booth from 2001 up until the 2015 season, but he's been basically working out as a rules analyst and inside the Race Hub studio over the last couple of years. And coming into the booth this weekend at Richmond makes a lot of sense. Larry McReynolds has a lot of experience basically being a crew chief, a legendary crew chief, and with this being a strategy-based race at Richmond, because remember, of course, there's going to be stage yells this time around, which I think they should ultimately get rid of them, but you're going to have a good opportunity to have strategy, and Larry McReynolds is going to be able to provide a lot of great strategy and a lot of great analysis out on the track. I think he'll do a fantastic job. Do a great job, in my opinion, and overall, I'm excited to see that Larry McReynolds is going to be in the Fox Sports booth this weekend because I think he's going to do an absolute job. I wish he was full-time in the booth because he sounds like at home. He does always a really good job in the booth, and overall, in my honest opinion, I hope we get to see Larry McReynolds in the booth again in the future in more races. I know that Tony's supposed to be in the booth a couple more times, but I think seeing Larry McReynolds back in the booth this weekend just feels at home, and I'm excited to see he'll be back in the booth. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Chase Elliott. As Chase Elliott joined the Fox Sports booth yesterday at Circuit Americas and talked a little bit about the recovery and to talk about that he's still recovering in Colorado. Invited his first comments since the injury at Colorado and is back on TV. Glad to see Chase Elliott is absolutely back for recovery. Basically said that it is what it is, and he's continuing to recover from the injuries that he received this past at Colorado. Of course, he basically got a massive injury in Colorado skiing before the Las Vegas weekend, and he still was recovering. There's still no current timetable on when we're going to see Chase Elliott return to the racetrack. He's not giving any word, an indication on when he will officially return. Some people believe in the industry that it could be Martinsville in a couple weeks, or it could end up being at Talladega in about 4 or 5 weeks down the road, which is really, really exciting. That could be the return, though. It's a little bit dangerous considering it's a super speedway race. I'm really happy to see Chase Elliott get in the booth, though. I think Chase Elliott, honestly, did a really awesome and a really good job in the Fox Sports booth. He provided a lot of great analysis, and he was fun to listen to, which is a big surprise. I thought Chase Elliott was not going to be great in the Fox Sports booth. But I think Chase Elliott did a really, really good job in the Fox Sports booth, and it was very fun to listen to hear him in that Fox Sports booth. And I think that he did a really awesome and a really, really great job. So I'm excited to see, and maybe we'll see Chase Elliott in the booth a lot more in the future. Maybe Fox decides to bring him back, because I'd like to see him do some more races, especially since, you know, he's not going to be in the booth. He's not going to be in the Cup car for a few more weeks. Why not bring him back to the booth? He brought analysis, and I thought he did a great job, and I think he did a really good job with the Zoom call as well. And I'm glad to see Chase Elliott continues to recover. Hope he recovers really, really soon and gets back out to the racetrack as soon as possible. Hope he gets back to the racetrack really, really soon. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Preece. Now, Ryan Preece was very unhappy on social media after the NASCAR Cup Series race. He tweeted out a bunch of hacks. Then he got interviewed by someone from Front Stretch. I think it was like someone named Maddie, if I'm not mistaken, interviewed him from Front Stretch. And basically, Ryan Preece called out the etiquette on the track, basically called out the racing on the track, basically said a bunch of hacks, and called out the lack of respect on the racetrack. I basically called out a lot of it. And I can't blame Ryan Preece for being upset. Ryan Preece got absolutely screwed over, in my honest opinion. The racing on the racetrack near the end of these cup races, especially on the road courses, has been really, really bad. The race is going fine too, and the racing was going to be great till the end. And then Brad Keselowski happened where he stalled on the racetrack. He was kind of a nuisance in the cup race at COTA, and then it turned into chaos, and it turned into a complete shit show near the end of the race, and that happens a lot of times in these road course races. And as a fan of NASCAR, it's frustrating to watch. You either have to limit the overtimes going forward, because I think that's one thing that probably could have to end up happening, or, in my honest opinion, NASCAR needs to find a way to change something, because it's unacceptable, in my opinion, to see some of the etiquette on track. And Ryan Preece is right. The etiquette on track was unacceptable. These guys raced with no respect on the track, and it was unacceptable near the end of the race. They wreck each other, they don't care, and you got upset and angry drivers, and NASCAR needs to figure out some way to change it, because it's frustrating as a fan to watch, and to see the etiquette, as bad as it is as a fan, God, it sucks, it hurts to watch, and overall, in my honest opinion, I think the etiquette has to change very, very quickly, because I think the etiquette has absolutely not been good, and I think it's frustrating to watch as a race fan, because I think, one, the overtime restarts, I think the freaking massive amount of overtimes is a huge problem, in my honest opinion, and overall, I think it does need to change going forward. So we'll see what NASCAR does decide to do going forward, but in my honest opinion, the etiquette absolutely needs to change in NASCAR, and overall, I hope it does change, because I agree with Ryan Preece, the racing etiquette was absolutely horrendous this past weekend at Circuit of the Americas. Now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ross Chastain versus Daniel Suarez. Teammates very upset with each other after the NASCAR Cup Series race. So we'll talk about the cool down lap here in just a little bit, but Daniel Suarez was not very happy with Ross Chastain on pit road, and this is all from an incident that happened with about 10 to 15 laps to go in this race, where Ross Chastain basically sent it to the bottom, sent it 3 wide, and Alex Bowman ran up into Daniel Suarez because of Chastain's contact, and that's what resulted in Daniel Suarez being very, very upset with Ross Chastain. This is not really good for the team chemistry going forward. You don't want teammates being upset with each other. And we've seen in the past where teammates can be upset with each other. We saw last year with Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott, especially after the Auto Club incident. We saw how frustrated Chase Elliott was with Kyle Larson after the incident. And we've seen in the past where teammates have gotten frustrated with each other. Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon come to mind. But they were not happy with each other after the race. And it was kind of a surprise, too, because these teammates really have liked each other in the past. So to see them really frustrated with each other, I hope the Trackhouse can have a sit-down meeting with both drivers to get this issue resolved. Because in my opinion, it just sucks to see both teammates upset with each other. And it resulted in that contact going up in turn number 1. And the racing in that turn, it really resulted in that. And that's why I think that we saw Daniel Suarez just mad overall. But we'll get into Suarez here in just a little bit. But overall, in my honest opinion, when it comes to the situation, Daniel Suarez, and Chastain being pissed off each other is not overall the greatest look for Trackhouse Racing, because these two have really been aligned together. They work together very, very well and have raced each other generally with a lot of respect. But I don't know if that same respect that they've raced against each other with is going to continue going down the road and going down into the future. So I really hope that things can change between these two and nothing happens more going forward. But I'm not surprised to see Chastain getting more people mad. When you piss off your teammate, that's not a good thing, and we've seen Chastain piss off a lot of people over the last couple of years, and he's already pissed off quite a few people this year in 2023, and he's continuing to do that with some of the racing antics that he's done on the racetrack, which is why I think Daniel Suarez was overall really, really pissed off at Ross Chastain. And now we're going ahead and on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Kurt Busch. Now, Kurt Busch, of course, is in the Fox Sports booth this past weekend at Circuit of the Americas. And after the NASCAR Cup Series race, on the last lap of this race, you could tell the emotion that Kurt Busch really, really felt. And this shows that he really cares. He was so emotional seeing Tyler Reddick win. He basically says he wished he was in that 45 car. He was supposed to be in that 45 car this year, but he's happy to see that someone really, really good is behind the wheel. You could tell that Kurt Busch really cares about the team and making this team a lot better. He did say the same thing for Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace has got to keep his head up and just do a great job. And Denny Hamlin said something after the race to the media and said that Denny Hamlin said that Kurt Busch is still a 2311 racing driver and team member for life. Kurt Busch cares about 2311 racing and really cares about this team and the success of this team. And I think Kurt Busch being there makes a lot for this team. And he has made this team, is helping this team so much. You've got two solid drivers behind the wheel. And I think that this team long term can get better and really will get better. And I think the road course prowess, especially shout out to Keegan Leahy, who of course helps the team on the 2311 side, on the eSports side, has been a really big factor in helping the team out on the road course program. And I think it just shows a lot of great things with Kurt Busch, and he wants to be back behind the wheel. Kurt Busch didn't know yesterday that he has a doctor's appointment later today, and hopefully we will get an actual update if Kurt Busch can be medically cleared or not. We're hoping for a positive update. So we maybe could be getting a Kurt Busch return sooner rather than later. But of course, he still has to be medically cleared, but he's going to see a doctor later today, and I think Kurt really wants to get back behind the wheel of a car, and I hope he does get to be back behind the wheel of a race car in the foreseeable future. So overall, in my honest opinion, I'm glad to see Kurt Busch got the emotion. You don't normally see someone get emotional in the booth, but to see the emotion from Kurt Busch, just as a fan of the sport, made me really, really happy to see. And it makes me miss seeing Kurt Busch behind the wheel. He's become not only one of my personal all-time favorite race car drivers, but also my favorite all-time personalities, because he's became someone who's changed his personality even from 10 years ago. You look at how his personality has changed, how much better of a person he has become. He cares about this team. He cares about 2311 Racing. He wants to make them better, and I think he's happy to see 2311 Racing get the victory. He wants to see the team succeed long term. He cares about them, and I'm very happy to see that 2311 Racing is getting success now, and seeing Reddick get the victory made him very, very happy, and overall, seeing Kurt Busch as happy as he is really, really phenomenal and great to see overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the first of three major stories in today's episode, as we are talking about Daniel Suarez once again. Now, I've obviously talked about what happened between Daniel Suarez and Ross Chastain on pit road, but we need to talk about what led up to that and before that happened. So on the cool-down lap in the NASCAR Cup Series race, Daniel Suarez was hot and very, very frustrated. And Daniel Suarez, thinking that Alex Bowman was the one who initially made the contact, went down pit road and ran into the back of Alex Bowman, and there was a lot of contact. He ran into the back of him, and there were officials that were standing right there next to him when that contact happened and the situation happened. Then after he got out of the race car, Daniel Suarez went to confront Alex Bowman, but Bowman confronted him saying, "That wasn't my fault." And after that, Daniel Suarez went over and transferred his anger over to Ross Chastain. And I also have to mention that Daniel Suarez had contact with Christopher Bell 8 laps ago. We're starting to see evidence come out about that as well, where he turned Christopher Bell and caused the last lap crash. Let's talk about Daniel Suarez's situation. I understand Daniel Suarez being pissed off, frustrated, and upset. He had a chance to win the NASCAR Cup Series race. He was in contention, was up front, was potentially going to have a chance to win on field strategy, and he got basically dumped and wrecked and got turned by a lot of other people out on the racetrack. So I understand him being upset and frustrated. But here's one thing that needs to happen. He needs to be penalized, and I'll explain why. There are officials on pit road right there. And I think it is unacceptable, especially when you have race officials on pit road and crews on pit road. You cannot do what he did there. That is not only extremely dangerous what he did there, but I thought that was completely unjustified and unacceptable to do that. Get out of the car, talk to the drivers, don't hit these cars on pit road, don't endanger the pit crew members, and don't endanger the officials. I think a penalty is absolutely worthy for Daniel Suarez, but he's likely going to get a penalty tomorrow. I would have to imagine that he will either get a fine, he could also get a points penalty, and it wouldn't surprise me if he even gets a suspension for this. This could be suspension worthy, because if these cars hit a pit crew member and official, you can not only hurt an official, but you could have killed an official with these heavy stock cars. And this kind of stuff hitting on pit road is just uncalled for and unacceptable. And I think Daniel Suarez 100% deserves a penalty for this. Again, Daniel Suarez has every right to be frustrated and upset with the outcome of the race. He's got every right to be upset. But you cannot do what he did and get away with it. He's got to get penalized for that, and I really hope and pray that he gets a penalty for those actions, because I thought that was completely unacceptable from Daniel Suarez, and he 100% deserves a massive, massive penalty and a potential big penalty coming for Suarez's way. I think there's big penalties coming for Suarez, and I wouldn't be surprised if he receives a suspension for that. I think this is suspension worthy in my opinion. It's unacceptable and unjust that he did that, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story in today's episode as we're talking about Hailie Deegan. Now, I kind of talked about a little about this on the channel on Friday, but Hailie Deegan, we're talking about her a little bit because Mark Rushbrook was on SiriusXM NASCAR radio on Friday. I'm surprised not a lot of people are talking about this. But basically, Mark Rushbrook said that Ford is committed to Hailie Deegan long term. And they said that she didn't have a great first 2 races, something that wasn't her doing. But she had a great run in Atlanta where she ended up finishing 12th. And this past weekend at COTA, she was running in the top 10 a lot of the week. And she ended up finishing in 16 because of some contact she had with Katie Honeycutt. She overdrove the corner and ran into the back of Katie Honeycutt. That was just a mistake from Hailie Deegan. That was her fault 100%. But they said during that interview that they are potentially going to evaluate if she could potentially move up to Xfinity Series potentially in 2024. Decision for what the plans are for her past 2023 will come before the end of this year. And this potentially means that she could move up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2024. And obviously, if I'm in their position, I'm doing my best to give Hailie Deegan some NASCAR Xfinity Series starts this year. Now, with what organization? SS Greenlight Racing. Very recently, SS Greenlight Racing announced that they parted ways with Blaine Perkins. And Blaine Perkins is no longer driving for the team. Word on the street is Blaine Perkins is going to be driving the number 02 car for Our Motorsports, a team that he driven for a couple years ago in 2021 for the rest of 2023, starting this upcoming weekend at Richmond, and Kyle Weatherman will no longer be driving that car. That 07 car is available, and she drove that 07 car last year. If I'm in their position, I move Greg Galling over to 07 for some races and put Hailie Deegan in the 08 car. We saw SHR put Eric on a roll in the 08 car, and that's a 4 car still. So I would have to imagine that Ford is looking at potentially having Hailie Deegan and giving her some Xfinity Series starts this year to get her acclimated. Because I do believe that next year, she is going to move up to the Xfinity Series. Yes, some people are going to look at her stats and say, why? She's not ready. And looking at her stats, you would say, yeah, maybe you're right. But last year in the Xfinity Series, Hailie Deegan, in her debut, ended up finishing a very solid 13th place on the racetrack. And if I'm looking at Ford and looking at the long-term future, she's also got sponsorship funding from companies like Pristine Auctions and also Monster Energy and other companies that have been working with her, including Advent Health, especially recently for Women's Month and with March. And I think, in my honest opinion, if I'm in a situation with Ford and looking at Hailie Deegan, they need to try to see if they can give her some Xfinity Series starts and show what he's capable of. I think she's going to get better as the year goes on, too. She ran really good at this past weekend at COTA before the issues happened. So it's not like Hailie Deegan is overall a really, really bad driver. I think Hailie Deegan is a better driver than what she's shown in the Truck Series. I think she's a better for trucks, is not as good of a truck driver, but we've learned over time that you don't need to be as good in the Truck Series and you can be better in Xfinity. Look at Harrison Burton, for example. Harrison Burton struggled in trucks, went on to win 4 races in his rookie year in Xfinity. Look at Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson was okay in trucks, went to Xfinity, got 9 wins in 2000, got 8 wins in 2022, and is in Cup now. Look at Jimmy Johnson. Look at Ty Gibbs. I'm not saying she's like on the level of those guys, but I think if you give her Xfinity full time next year, I really believe that she'll show her stuff and possibility and capabilities and will be a contender. And I think that Phil's got more depth this year than last year, and I think she would be very competitive. And I know there's aggression in Xfinity, but it's not as bad as Truck Series. And she also doesn't get raced with a lot of respect. And I think she moved up to Xfinity, she would get a lot more respect on the racetrack, and I think respect would be a lot more given on the racetrack for us. So I think that they're going to look at this next year. If she moves up to Xfinity, you've got to look at Stu Ross Racing, and you got to look at SS Greenlight Racing as possibilities. Because I do believe there's a potential possibility that either Cole Cuss or Riley Herbst is going to move up the Cup next year. They've got sponsorship funding, and I think someone could potentially go up the Cup. So we'll see what happens going forward with Hailie Deegan. We'll see if she moves up next year, but I think there's a good chance that she can move up next year in 2024, but we'll have to see what happens. And now we're going to head on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, Kyle Busch was being interviewed after the NASCAR Cup Series race after finishing second. And Kyle Busch just didn't seem really pissed off on pit road, which is a surprise when he finishes second. But he seemed a lot more happy. And he did say that he had a lot of respect for Tyler Reddick on the track and how he raced people and didn't want to take it away from Tyler Reddick. And at the end of the interview, he called out Ross Chastain and says, somebody that doesn't know anything about clean over here. He's talking about the guy next to him, which of course is Ross Chastain. Kyle Busch is saying what a lot of us are thinking, and is out Ross Chastain, is the fact that Ross Chastain not only races with a lack of respect but the disrespect that Ross Chastain can put on the racetrack frustrates a lot of people. And, people say, well, Kyle Busch wasn't raced hard by Ross Chastain, so why is Kyle Busch calling out Ross Chastain? Well, Ross Chastain has raced Kyle Busch hard in the past and not with a lot of respect. We saw what happened, of course, at Richmond in the summer, in July and August. Kyle Busch got turned by Ross Chastain. And Kyle Busch has been raced hard and aggressively by Ross Chastain many, many times in the past. And the driver etiquette on the track has been really, really bad. And Chastain's been a big part of that. And I think Kyle Busch is also just frustrated with the lack of respect on the racetrack. He lacked respect. He saw from Tyler Reddick and William Byron. And the fact that he can race those guys with respect and didn't take them out is great to see. He raced Reddick with a lot of respect, too, on the racetrack. But you look at the situation, I think Kyle Busch is 100% calling out the lack of respect from Ross Chastain and calling it out. And I think it just shows there's a lot of drivers in the garage that are not happy with Ross Chastain. There's been a lot of drivers that haven't liked what Ross Chastain's done. Even his teammates pissed off at him right now. Bowman's been pissed off at him this year. Last year with Denny Hamlin and the rivalry they've had. You've got other drivers like Austin Dillon who's been pissed off at Chastain in the past. Eric Jones was pissed off at Chastain. And I think Kyle Busch is just a driver that wants to respect these guys. And he's been on this tour of just calling out the lack of respect on the racetrack. And it just shows that he's tired of drivers racing way over their heads. Because there used to be a lot of great etiquette in the sport. And I think he's tired of drivers racing way in over the heads. And I think he's going to start calling out all the drivers in this sport. In fact, in the truck race, he basically called out a couple dumbasses on the racetrack is what he said. I can't remember who it was he called out, but there were two people in the middle of the pack. He had to come back to the race. And he called out two people on the racetrack after. He's just tired of getting raced with disrespect on the track. And if there's someone who has shown that they can be really respectful on the racetrack, it's Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch races clean, raced with a lot of respect, and a lot of good things. And I think that it just shows that Kyle Busch is tired of getting raced with disrespect on the track, and he's tired of people racing stupidly. And in my honest opinion, I don't blame Kyle Busch at all for calling out Chastain. I think it's justified. I think it's deserved. I know that Ross Chastain did nothing to Kyle Busch in this race, but I think that his comments hold true. Chastain's pissed off a lot of people this year. And I know that Chastain's not going to change. And again, that's why Chastain got to the Cup Series, because he raced hard and aggressive. And he got the opportunity because he raced hard and got wins. But Chastain is not making a lot of friends. And again, I know that Chastain's not here to make friends. He's out here to win races and get wins for Trackhouse Racing. But he's pissed off a lot of people. And when you're pissing off your teammate and you're pissing off people, especially Kyle Busch, who's been in the Cup Series a lot longer than you, who's won 2 Cup Series championships, I can't blame Kyle Busch at all for being upset with Ross Chastain there. I think it's justified. I think it's a little bit ridiculous how Chastain has raced people, especially over the years. And in my opinion, when you look at the situation, I think it's justified. Kyle Busch's comments are 100% absolutely justified. I know that it wasn't from the race. It's probably just from built up for a while. And I think that the driver's corps is just pissed off at Ross Chastain. And I think he's just pissed off in general at how their etiquette has gone off the hinges. We got F1 drivers calling it out. We got drivers like Ryan Preece calling it out. Drivers are frustrated with the etiquette, and they want it to change. And it needs to get better. Drivers used to have etiquette in the sport, and it's gotten worse, especially on the road courses. I think overtimes in the rule need to change, where the overtimes, there's 1 or 2 overtimes, and you get rid of the unlimited overtimes, because it causes all this bullshit and all this stuff on the track, and overall, it can be frustrating to watch as a fan. And I think Kyle Busch's comments, though, against Ross Chastain are 100% absolutely justified, in my honest opinion. I think it's completely just and completely justified. So, that is going to be it for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on so you know if I win a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my Patreon as well. Links are down below over that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's video. What are your thoughts about Kyle Busch calling out Ross Chastain? Do you think it's justified or not? Let me know in the comments below. And do you think Hailie Deegan will actually move up to the Xfinity Series or not in 2024? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, we're going to have the Truck Series race picks from the upcoming race at Texas Motor Speedway. Tomorrow on the channel, we're going to have Xfinity Series race picks and, of course, the intros for the Cup race at Richmond Raceway. And also, we'll have a potential video out if Daniel Suarez does receive penalties as well. Then, of course, on Wednesday, we'll have a NASCAR news video. And also, of course, we'll have the paint scheme video. And then Thursday will be race picks video for the Cup race at Richmond. And a lot of other special content on the way as well for you to enjoy. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. And I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.